Okay, an unboxing video. I got home and there was a whole pile of parcels waiting for me. These are samples of hoplites from every company that I am aware of that produces hoplite 15mm miniatures. And I'm going to open them now and take a look at them and talk a little about hoplite equipment. Technically, these first packets are not actually a delivery. These are hoplites from minifigs, and I've actually owned these for about 20 years. They were variously painted, and I've essentially used some paint stripper on them to bring them back to their original metal and removed what on minifigs is a very wobbly spear. Hoplite soldiers were primarily armed with a spear, employed in one hand, usually to thrust over the shield. The most basic question a wargamer would wish to ask, and one to which there doesn't seem to be a very good answer, is how long was the spear? Obviously, wooden shafts don't survive, so we don't know. Estimates online vary wildly from 2 to 4 meters. And the figures from different companies range around that kind of thing as well, from the shortest being about 25mm, so 15mm scale, that's 1 to 100, so 2.5 meters, to the longest being nearly 4 meters in length. There is a body of evidence that could be relevant to this, and since it's a leitmotif of this series, I thought I would mention it, which is historical martial arts and reenactment. Those tend to blur over into experimental archaeology, and while most of the people involved are doing it for the same reason wargamers are doing their hobby, they're having fun, some enthusiasts do gradually accumulate enough knowledge to become historians, because experimental archaeology, while it has very genuine epistemological issues with trying to work from what could be done to what was done, has demonstrated real utility as historical evidence, in a way that wargaming has singularly failed to. So it does have the potential to resolve questions about the length of the weapon, the distance between ranks, whether the spear was used underarm or overhead, all things that affect a miniature wargamer's visual representation. A little note on what we do know. There are lots of surviving metal parts, and we know the spear was effectively double-ended. The spearhead at the front and a long spike at the back. You'll find the term sororta for the spike at the back, and so that's useful to remember. You will also see the spear called a doru, but that, like the use of aspis for the shield, is a bit of an indulgence. Those are just Greek words for spear and shield. They're not technical terms denoting a particular piece of equipment. These two elements are both quite long, 20 to 40 centimeters, which would be visible on a 15mm figure, 2 to 4 millimeters long. I did say there were no surviving examples. I have come across in the literature references to a single grave find in which the spear was estimated to be 2.2 meters in length. And my instinct, which probably shouldn't be trusted and is why so much military history is so bad, is that the spear was usually a lot shorter than is often assumed. Anyway, this is not a review video today. It's an unboxing video. I will do a review at some point, and historical accuracy will be a part of the score I give on that. These are from Old Glory. Nicely wrapped. Aha! Here they are. They come in a pack. Spartan hoplites. Let's get one of these out. So, Spartan hoplites from Old Glory with the V on the shield, metal spears already attached. I think this pack are all standing. They look like they're a single pose, all with the simple Pilos helmet. And what do we have here? These are from Essex. One of the variations between companies is whether you have to order a large group or you can order a small group. Old Glory and Zeiston, you've got to order a substantial chunk of figures in one go. Essex, oh my goodness, the invoice is larger than the small pack MPA 25 of later Greek hoplites. Comes in a little Ziploc bag. Again, these are standing with so the spears are not actually attached, they are on the base, but you can see you can just twist them off the base and they'll obviously go into the hand. There's a lot of flash on these. They've got little shield curtains on those. And those, that's two. Well, we've got several different poses here. Okay, let's talk about the shield apron, a curious feature which occurs occasionally on attic vases and other artistic representations. Two of the Essex variants in the pack feature this element, one with a Corinthian helmet, one with a simpler helmet with no face protection. It appears on vase paintings to be some sort of drape hung on the outside of the shield from a rod which is fixed into the wooden surface of the shield. In artistic depictions, it tends to drop quite a bit lower and appear to be a little bit wider than the depiction on the Essex figures. The depiction on the Essex models doesn't seem to be a very good representation, though it's worth saying that there are clearly regional difference in artistic depictions of the shield aprons. So John was an archaeologist of some reputation who has done work on some aspects of hoplite arms and armour. In 1986 they penned an article which, as far as I can tell, is the most up-to-date treatment of the shield apron. Java was able to find just over 100 depictions, but no definite physical survival or textual reference. To give a sense of how rare 100 depictions actually is, you could easily pull together 3,000 depictions of shields just looking at pottery. So it's less than 3% of all the hoplite shields depicted in artwork have a shield apron attached to them. And even when they do, they tend to appear on vases where other hoplites on the same vase are not using a shield apron. There is a widely repeated idea that the apron acted as leg protection, specifically employed to deal with mass Persian archery in the early part of the 5th century. That seems logical, but there's no actual evidence for that, other than a very rough correspondence between the chronology of the depictions and the chronology of the Persian Wars. But when I say a rough correspondence, I mean a very rough correspondence, and one that probably owes more to when the bulk of our evidence comes from than anything else. But if you wanted to, you could reflect the consensus of secondary literature on this and use it as a way to distinguish, say, an Athenian army for the Battle of Marathon or an Athenian allied army for the period 500 to 450 by including one or two shield aprons on each base. But I would treat it more as an artistic conceit than a representation of actual reality. I can see no consideration in the literature of several other very obvious hypotheses that it's largely a function of vase painting, like heroic nudity, or that its purpose was primarily decorative, perhaps persisting over a longer period for those hoplites with both money and an ego. All arranged with thrusting spears, some with Corinthian helmets, some with later simpler helmets, one of them with a transverse crest and a rather oddly positioned shield. Maybe do a close-up of that for you. Right, let's put those to one side. Get the next one out. Doesn't actually say who it's from. Let's look inside. I'm genuinely doing this live. I have not looked at any of these. Oh, it's wrapped in newspaper, like an old bag of fish and chips. No receipt. RC31 times 2. Yep, no receipt. I'll work out at the end which company this is from, and I will edit it into the video. Some interesting headgear here, and it looks like several different poses. Okay, yes, there's a variety of headgear in that. There's quite a lot of kind of offset and flash on those. The irregular figures have 3 different types of helmet, none of which appear to be the conventional depictions of the Corinthian or Pylos helmet. So this is probably a good moment to talk about helmets. The helmet that we most frequently associate with the hoplite is the Corinthian, a fully enclosed bronze helmet with a narrow Y-shaped set of slits for eyes and mouth. This one is from the Metropolitan Museum. On Wargames figures, they are very consistently depicted with a horsehair crest fitting tightly to the helmet. And they usually do, in artistic depictions, have a horsehair crest, though this is not the only form that that crest takes. The helmet does vary, both in surviving examples and in art, in terms of its shape, whether or not it has holes for the ears, ridges, etc. But the general form's quite consistent and quite iconic for the hoplite. The other type of helmet you'll see frequently on figures, again, for an actual example, here's one from the Metropolitan Museum in New York, is the Pylos helmet, which offers no protection below the crown of the head. There are other types of helmet. One type you will see talked about occasionally is the Illyrian style open-faced helmet. And I think one of the irregular figures is trying to represent this. The assumption which I've seen widely repeated is that Corinthian helmets were the norm through the period of the Persian Wars, but dropped out of use and were replaced by the Pylos around the mid-5th century BC. So in terms of what a wargamer is interested in, that means that troops fighting in the Persian Wars, Marathon and Plataea, should have Corinthian helmets. The bulk of troops for the Peloponnesian War would wear the Pylos, but presumably some would still have Corinthian helmets. And in the 4th century, essentially everybody would wear a Pylos. Now this is important to the wargamer because it's the most distinctive element of a figure's profile. You can tell the difference between troops with crested Corinthian helmets and troops with uncrested Pyloses. I don't know why that assumption is made, because you definitely can mount a crest on a Pylos helmet and you don't need to mount a crest on a Corinthian helmet. But you can tell the difference between those two several feet away looking at a War Games table. It is the most distinctive feature of the equipment of the units that you're going to be putting on the table. What I haven't seen in anything I've looked at yet is anyone presenting any actual evidence for this change at this date. Right, what do we have on this one? It says Westwind. I don't recognise the manufacturer's name Westwind, so either I have something that isn't actually a Hoplite pack mixed in with my Hoplite unboxing video, or one of the companies I think of with a different name. Oh, okay. So this is Forged in Battle, whose ancients I think go under the name War and Empire. Again, Forged in Battle, I correct myself. Earlier I said Zyston and Old Glory only do large packs. I think actually it's Forged in Battle and Old Glory who only do large packs. So we've got big plastic pack of Greek hoplites, which are described as later Greek assorted hoplites. And we've got pose there, standing pose there. So one of the things I do when I get a group is I usually sit with them and do a sort to see how many different poses I've got. That's showing a lot of his legs. That looks like he doesn't have any terragaze. Maybe I'll insert a little bit here talking about terragaze. The terragaze are flaps hanging down from the bottom of the corselet, presumably intended to protect the groin while not restricting the mobility of the hips. Most of the figures match visual representations in that the soldier is wearing clothing underneath that hangs down further than the terragaze. The terragaze themselves could have been metal, leather, linen, or some combination. It's worth saying, with the exception of the minifigs, I think every figure I have that has body armour is represented with terragaze. It's not clear to me that that was universally the case, that automatically terragaze were attached if a person wore body armour. Yeah, we have several different poses here. A flute player, that's nice. So yeah, nice little number of them there. Several different poses, several different helmet types, some different armoured options. So all back into the bag. I'm not going to do any cuts, so you are just literally going to watch me do this live and put everything back in the bag and sort through everything. But what I'm going to do when I've finished the video, well, when I've finished unboxing everything, is when I edit it all together, I will put in some little inserts where I will talk about the different bits of Hoplite equipment and illustrate some of these figures in a bit more detail. In fact, you've probably by this stage already seen some of those. Who do we have here? Ah, museum miniatures. Oh, wrapped in bubble wrap. To be honest, I don't think metal miniatures that are coming in the post really need to be wrapped in bubble wrap. I think they'll probably survive. Ah, okay. They sent a free sample, Trojan sample, out now from the Z Sculpt range. So these are Museum Miniatures' new Z Sculpts, which I was quite excited about because they also do some hoplites that would be suitable for a sort of Frank Miller 300 army. And I have one Jason and the Argonauts style skeleton army, and I don't have an opponent for it. So these might well be the place I go for the opponents. I'm looking at that and thinking, that is a very flat looking hoplite shield. Let me insert a little bit there. The shield is the most distinctive element of the hoplite's equivalent, and enough survive and enough depictions are known that there's no big mysteries here. It was a large, round wooden frame with a very marked convex shape. It wasn't bronze, it was wooden, but it was usually edged with bronze and occasionally had a decorative embossed or engraved layer of bronze, quite a thin one, a millimetre or so, of bronze on the surface. It's generally assumed that most hoplite shields were simply painted. The soldier themselves held it via two straps, one at the elbow, one by the hand, and the elbow seems to have gone into the centre of the shield and the hand at the very edge, so that the left hand side of the shield is sticking out to the left hand side of the hoplite. Though there are always uncertainties, as we saw with the length of spears, the shield is by far the best evidence piece of equipment, and it is remarkably consistent. Almost every known hoplite shield falls between 90 and 110 centimetres in diameter. And that shouldn't be quite as surprising, that consistency, as you might think. Though a citizen hoplite bought their own equipment, and some of them may have painted their own equipment, they bought it from a large cottage industry that will have sold things like the shield in a standard size. And the various manufacturers who I've opened today are surprisingly bad in this regard. Essex, Chariot and Forged in Battle shields are much too small for hoplites. The Zeiston shield is really too small as well because the figures are overscaled. As I've already mentioned, the museum miniature shield is remarkably flat. The very concave shape of the hoplite shield is a very consistent and distinctive feature of it. It's not simply a flat piece of wood. The best of the manufacturers is probably Old Glory, but again, you have to be wary of all of their Theban range, which have a ridiculous club modelled onto the surface of the shield, which just has no basis. I'm genuinely disappointed with how bad the depiction of hoplite shields seems to be from all but one or two of the manufacturers. But that is technically a topic for a review video. We do have crouching figures. I have no idea if ancient Greek warriors actually crouched, but certainly modern movies love the idea of figures forming shield walls when they're crouching, so that's potentially very useful. But we got a free sample where I didn't pay for that figure. That's awesome. Okay, I'm going to need a knife for this. This is my Magister Militum order. So Magister Militum is one of the companies I routinely get things from on a fairly regular basis because they have a very large range. It's very straightforward and easy to order. Yes, I did have some issues with ordering, either with online systems not working or addresses not going through or PayPal throwing a wobbly, which is one of the reasons I think some people consistently order from the same company. What have we got here? Thank you for your customer. Our latest news. I got a newsletter telling me about their latest 10mm fantasy. 10mm is an odd scale. I don't have anything in 10mm. It feels like a really weird halfway house. I can maybe see how if I was starting out from scratch and literally getting new into historical games, that maybe 10mm would have been a nice choice in preference to 15mm. But overall, I'm very doubtful about it. So And this is one of the standard things that I routinely order from Magister Militum. These are pre-cut Perspex bases. I do sometimes make my own Perspex bases, but these are pre-cut ones. I ordered in the Vidi Vici transfers, which are so. I'll do a separate video on transfers because I want to talk about little big men at some point. Ah, that's nice. So I ordered one element. The code is HOG22X1, which is a hoplite element. These are clearly intended to be later, presumably Spartan hoplites, and it came in a pack with 4 figures and all the same pose and 1 base design for it. So this is a 40mm by 15mm base, and I used to laboriously follow the standard DBX rules, and I no longer do so. 15mm deep bases are a nightmare because the figures are going to be more than 15mm tall. So the centre of gravity is just way off, and they will be constantly falling over on you. And that is a terrible thing for a playing piece to do. So what I do now is I mount all infantry on larger 20mm deep bases. Also, I'll talk about this in a bit more detail in another episode. Place these figures onto a base. You will see that on a 40mm frontage, 4 men do not actually make a complete line. So I'm actually going to be mounting the vast majority of my hoplites 5 wide. So I got this literally just as a sample, and when I order everything in, once I've decided which manufacturer I'm getting everything from, I will take that into account and I'll be ordering slightly more. Body armour is well studied for the hoplite. The bulk of the material evidence unfortunately predates the period wargamers are broadly interested in, the Persian Wars, the Peloponnesian War and the conflicts of the 4th century, but there are a fair number of finds from sites like Olympia. There is an Archaeologia volume by Java on archaic hoplite armour, and somebody gave me a copy of that many years ago, so I did have a look at that recently. It provides a detailed typology of the metal cuirasses. The consensus seems to be that the earliest armour had a wide flared bell bottom to it, and that this was gradually replaced by a flat-edged bottom to the cuirass with a more naturalistically modelled musculature on the chest. But metal was not the normal material for body armour at any period. Even in the archaic period, when sites like Olympia preserve a lot of dedications of metal equipment, metal body armour is vastly outnumbered by helmets and shields, which suggests only a very small proportion of hoplites wore it. The usual assumption is that most hoplites wore what archaeologists call a composite corselet, made of materials which don't survive in the archaeological record, and which wargamers tend to call a linen corselet or a linothorax. Linen's an entirely logical material to make cheap armour out of if you don't want to be making out of metal, so it's a logical set of terms. On figures, it's usually depicted as a flat surface with shoulder pieces of some type, but sometimes the composite corselet is depicted as scales. There also seems to be, and I'm not entirely sure what the basis of it is, an assumption that as time progressed, armour got lighter, that gradually hoplites abandoned body armour entirely and simply wore everyday tunics. There is a logic to this, that as citizen hoplites who had to make a certain wealth criteria were gradually replaced with troops mobilised and equipped by the state, there would be attempts to cut costs, and the body armour is the most expensive bit of the hoplite panoply that you don't technically need. It seems like an obvious place to cut corners and eliminate a significant cost. But I'm not clear that there's any actual evidence that that was done. This kind of thing goes on in wargaming a lot. People go, oh, it's logical that this happened, and then it gets repeated and repeated and repeated until it becomes a this did happen. Nor is there very much evidence on how this actually worked in practice. Java spends some time speculating on the general issue of how heavily armoured hoplites were and how it was dealt with in practice that hoplites had different levels of armour, and suggests, one of the suggestions that Java speculates on is that the hoplite phalanx had heavily armoured troops at the front and gradually lighter and lighter troops as you moved backwards. That's one of those things that I'm going to need to think about before I finalise exactly which figures I need and how exactly I'm going to arrange them on bases. So that must mean that the last packet I have left is from Zyston, who are the one company I have not done. It says, oh, it's from Scotland. It doesn't say the company name. I'm assuming it's Zyston, because I don't think I've opened a Zyston packet so far. You might be sitting at home going, yes, you've opened a Zyston packet. We heard you talk about it. It is very well packaged. I don't really believe I ordered enough to justify that amount of packaging. Zyston miniatures packing set. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so that's a function of somebody thinking about modern computers. My Zyston invoice tells me what I ordered and has a picture of everything that I ordered next to the thing so that I can check. Then it has a list of the different processing stages and what happened. Wow. So, again, really well packed. And we have two things in here. Let's talk about these. So the additional thing that I ordered were brass spears. So, okay. I was curious. The brass spears do not have a leaf-shaped point. They literally just come to a straight point. So, oh, that does seem to vary. Let me pull a different one out. Ah, that seems to have a leaf-shaped flattened point, whereas that seems to just come straight to a point. So they seem to vary a little. I ordered a whole bunch of brass spears in because the minifigs I showed you at the start. Minifigs are made from an incredibly soft lead. I mean, this is genuine. There's a lot of lead in this, whereas most modern miniatures are made with some sort of pewter and they don't really have lead in any longer. And one of the results of that is with them holding the spear. They hold the spear. Get one of these out. They hold the spear sort of thrusting it in their hand like this. And that just wobbles all over the place on the original minifigs. It's completely useless. You're constantly having to straighten it back up. So I took all of their original spears off. I'll be drilling small holes, and I'll be putting new brass spears in the place. And the one place I know of that I can get those is from Zeiston. So since I was ordering a sample in, I ordered in the brass spears to go with it. These are the Zeiston miniatures themselves. Okay, I think these are the only ones I've received where the shield has come as a separate piece. Yes, and there's a couple of things I noticed about Zeiston when I was doing this. One of them is the figures don't have spears. You need to purchase packs of spears and assemble themselves. They have separate shields. Zeiston miniatures are notoriously overscaled. There's some really bad scale creep people notice going on with Zeiston. I'm not going to cover that today, but that will be a video. I will do a video talking about scale creep on the Zeiston, on the miniatures in general. I'll do a complete scale comparison of all of the samples that I have purchased. These have long hair, and that is actually quite important because that's one of the things we know from Thucydides distinguished the Spartans. When Spartan troops were captured at Sphacteria and they were brought back to Athens, Thucydides comments that the young aristocratic men in the city started aping their fashion of long hair. And I think almost everybody does their Greek hoplites with short hair. So that's something I need to take into account when I decide what exactly I'm going to order to get my final figures. But one last piece of equipment, leg greaves. This is an important one. In the early period when evidence of material remains is common, bronze greaves which protect the lower legs are frequently found. They're not quite as common as helmets, suggesting that most hoplites wore them, but not all hoplites, which makes sense. The hoplite shield is big. It could protect the torso and the upper legs, but it leaves the head and the lower legs vulnerable. So it makes sense to prioritise protecting those parts, the head with a helmet and the lower legs with greaves. Some of the figures have greaves, some do not. In general, if a figure has body armour, it tends to also have greaves, which makes sense to me. Body armour is significantly more expensive than a pair of greaves. Even a composite corselet made of linen would be significantly more expensive than a set of bronze greaves. And the body armour, of course, is protecting the part of the body protected by the shield. So if you were going to forego something, it would be the body armour, not the greaves. What I think is slightly awkward is that none of the unarmoured hoplites have greaves. Like I said, logically, you'd give up the body protection before you gave up the leg protection. You've still got the shield if you give up your body protection, but you give up your greaves and you can be just stabbed in the leg. That's just going to be really unpleasant. So I would have appreciated from those manufacturers who've decided that they're going to represent some hoplites as what I'm calling unarmoured because they don't have armour on their torso. I would have appreciated some of those to be depicted with greaves. There we go. That's my unboxing video. I'll have some obvious questions. If you've used any of these figures, do you have any strong preferences on them? Anything that you came across in using them that's either a warning or a really good thing? Have I missed a manufacturer that you're aware of that does later hoplite figures? and I'll be back with a new project video on this soon. Thank you.